Well, it was a very interesting Labour Party conference.
Yeah.
There were two key things that happened. One is Jeremy Corbyn scored a resounding victory.
Did he? Yeah.
Last Saturday in being elected with 62% of the vote.
Yes, 62.
However, it is also true that the opposition to Jeremy Corbyn has hardened rather than softened.
Really?
What they did is that because the process of selecting representatives to go to the Labour Party conference and the process of controlling the machinery of the conference and of the party is very much in the hands of people who have a long period of experience in doing these things and have been inside the machine and apparatus
for a long while.
For a long period of time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, after Jeremy Corbyn won the election of the Labour Party leadership last September, the people who supported Jeremy Corbyn wrongly, perhaps, believed that change would happen because the democratic mandate of the people inside the party and the supporters of the party had elected Jeremy Corbyn. They expected things somehow to fall into line.
But it didn't.
They didn't have experience in the history of the Labour movement and the battles inside the Labour movement that have to be fought in order to transform these organisations from ossified structures related to Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and the whole history of what we can call reformism or New Labour in modern times. And this means that rather than taking control of the local Labour parties, there has been a certain feeling that things would just work out all right. They didn't work out all right. After less than a year, the Labour Party right wing and the so-called moderates, as they're called, and I don't really know what that term's supposed to mean, but in any case, I'll use it because it's a mainstream term, orchestrated a coup d'etat against Jeremy Corbyn with the objective of removing him from office without an election. When they failed to do this, and they failed to prevent him getting on the ballot paper, they were then resoundingly defeated in the election for Labour leadership, despite having the support of the Conservative Party, of the mainstream media, and of the party machine, apparatus and members of Parliament. The Labour Party members and supporters, those who weren't gerrymandered and excluded from voting in the election, which is about 150,000 people were prevented from voting, even though they should have had the right to vote. But now our task is recognising the circumstances we're in, where the party machinery is organised by a hostile force, and where the leadership is isolated but has a huge mandate from the membership. Given these circumstances, what are we to do? We have to formulate policies that galvanise support within the population to bring about change in society. Change like we want to see. In other words, universal healthcare, free on demand. A national health service at the highest quality in the world. Free education at university level and at schooling level. Access to education at university level and all levels for anyone at any age. Full employment by planning how to utilise the resources of the country, land, labour and capital, in order to mobilise investment channels that will produce employment and services that the people want to have. The creation of 1 million homes, half of which will be council funded, half of which will be private and council funded and government funded, in order to house the population and transform the relations in Britain between housing and the population. At the moment, housing has been turned primarily into an object of speculation rather than a use, something you live in. It's been turned into an object of speculation for people to accumulate cash or to big companies to plunder the resources of the population, for mortgage companies to rip people off, for private landlords to stuff their pockets full. There is almost no regulation of housing in Britain. Almost no regulation. And we have the worst housing stock in the whole of Western Europe and the highest prices in the whole of Western Europe. This is completely irrational and illogical. The difference between construction costs and sale costs in London, for example, is 80%. 80%. That's the markup they're making on these buildings they're building in Canary Wharf, or sorry, now by Battersea Power Station and so on. 80% markup. Now, what I say is this: local government and national governments, they must construct houses. They must identify those areas where we can construct, and I can start with this. Don't imagine we have to get special planning permission to build new properties somewhere. No, that's not the case. All we have to do as a starting point is to examine where there are empty properties waiting to be used. In London alone, a study by the Policy Exchange, a right-wing Tory think tank, explained a couple of months ago that there are enough empty properties in London alone, commercial properties in London alone, to house 420,000, or better said, to produce 420,000 new homes. 420,000. They could house about 1 million people in London alone, in the empty properties that exist, commercial properties. Take, for example, it's becoming a standing joke here, but if you look around here, just behind the bus here,
By the bus
there's a building there.
Yeah.
In the middle of Mayfair, Park Lane, the Monopoly Board, £350, right? That building's been empty for 27 years. 27 years. And then they have people sleeping in front of the building. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's not good enough to say they're allowed to do it legally. It's not good enough to say these are loopholes in the law that allow this to happen. We have to implant in society an attitude that fundamentally questions the relations of property and power, the relationship between property, power and politics. Because that, ladies and gentlemen, that is what is behind the attempted coup d'etat against Jeremy Corbyn this summer. It was not the will of Labour Party members. It was not the will of the general population, who hate Jeremy Corbyn, apparently, so the media tell us. It was the interests of big companies, big financiers, who funding resources into the right wing of the Labour Party. Tom Watson, for example, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, who declared war on Jeremy Corbyn this week. After Jeremy Corbyn won 62% of the vote, Tom Watson declares that he basically won't accept it, that they're organising a campaign to defend Tony Blair. Tony Blair, the war criminal. Tony Blair, the one who told us weapons of mass destruction were 45 minutes away from being shot at the British. The Tony Blair who orchestrated the dropping of laser-guided missiles on the people of Iraq, killing 150,000 people in Iraq. 150,000 people. And it's estimated by the Lancet, the Journal of the British Medical Association, that up to 1 million people have died as an indirect consequence of the war in Iraq. We have a migration problem, we're told. Jeremy Corbyn must change his tune on migration. Where has the migration fears come from? Where have they come from? Most of the people entering Europe, crossing over from Turkey or from Libya or from Egypt or Tunisia. They come from countries where Britain backed dictatorships in those countries, and then subsequently in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya. The British were involved and are involved in military action, which has led to the emergence of this terrorist force that they call IS, Islamic Daesh, ISIL they call it. The fact of the matter is, when ISIL swept in across Iraq and conquered one city after another about 2 years ago, the real reason they were successful, because the Americans and the British, who had gone to war in Iraq, had completely and absolutely failed to secure the peace in Iraq. The Americans and the British, don't forget, set up torture chambers where they tortured, where they abused, where they sexually mistreated prisoners, where thousands and thousands of innocent people were tortured for false information. In Fallujah, they fired white phosphorus at the people, sent in drones, burnt the skin off their bodies, men, women and children, bodies floating down the Tigris. That was the daily experience of the Iraqi people after we liberated them. And then, of course, as a consequence of that, inside our own countries, look at the racial mixture of the people of London. Inside our own countries, some people felt that their brothers and sisters being killed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Egypt when we backed the dictatorship of Mubarak, in Tunisia when we backed the dictatorship in Tunisia, and we still back the dictatorship of Saudi Arabia when they bomb against Yemen. And so this utter hypocrisy of what we are told about why we must back, why we must stop Jeremy Corbyn, because he represents something dangerous, something different, something unspeakable, something impossible. He represents a man in politics telling the truth. Telling the truth. That is why they fear him. He's not buyable. They can't corrupt him. He won't say what they pay him to say. He won't do up his tie to satisfy the Queen. He won't bow down in front of foreign leaders. He won't bow down in front of the Americans with their cruise missiles, their Trident missiles that they want us to have, spending hundreds, 120 billion, wasting resources that should be spent on health, education, welfare, improving the lives of the people. Every single advance in technology and science that we see today, every advance. You know, I've got a mobile phone here. It's broadcasting live. I got my own television station. How much did Rupert Murdoch pay to put up a satellite to make sure he could broadcast to the world? The balance of power between the people and the establishment and the old elites and the billionaires has shifted. That is what we are seeing with Jeremy Corbyn. That is what we saw with Bernie Sanders. That is what we saw with Podemos. That is what we see in Greece, in Italy. In fact, everywhere around the world there is an awakening of a new relationship of power between the people, technology and power. And we have the ability to shift the balance of wealth and power on a world scale. Today, 62 individuals. 62? What's that? Twice the number we got here? Maybe less than that. Own more wealth than half of the world's population. Did anybody see on the BBC this week a small article on their website? It said 33% of the British population, the British adult population, earn or have less than £100 in savings. 33% of the adult population have less than £100 in savings. In London, it is 48%. 48% of the London population have no more than £100 in savings. You cannot live for a week in London on less than £100. You cannot. So when they tell you we have a new society, an inclusive society, we're better off than ever before, we're well off, we're a rich society, why are a third of the population unable to survive more than a few days on their savings? And where did all the wealth go? That these people, that their parents, their grandparents, yea, down through the ages back to the Stone Age, where did the wealth that these third of the British population accumulated over the last 2 million years, where did it go? That these people, 1/3 of the British population, have no savings to speak of at all. So what have we worked for the last millions of years? What's the point? If after, in a year like 2016, the people have less than £100. Therefore, what Marx explained way back in 1848, the workers are compelled to sell their ability to work on the marketplace. Compelled. They are not slaves because they're not owned by somebody else. Therefore, the owner doesn't have to house them, feed them, clothe them. Instead of this, they are compelled, in order to pay their rent, in order to feed themselves, to pay the basics of life, to have a travel card, they're compelled to sell their ability to work on the marketplace. And for this ability to work, they receive what it takes to bring them back to work, and no more. Because otherwise, how do you explain that with all their ancestors, they've not been able to accumulate £100 in 2 million years of human existence? How come? So the question remains this. The question is fundamentally about production. Those people, those firms, those banks that control the decisive levers of economic power. In Britain, 150 companies control more than 70% of the value of the stock market. 150. There are 6 million private companies in Britain, but 150 control 70 to 80% of the value of the stock market. Those companies, the commanding heights of the economy, must be taken under control, made subject to democratic decisions, and the resources used for the benefit of the people, so that every advance in technology brings a corresponding advance in the improvement of the lives, a reduction in the working week, a reduction in the working life, an increase in the health, education, culture and art that the population are able to enjoy. That is how a logical and rational world will be organised, provided we are able and willing to challenge the wealth and power of the tiny minority, the 0.01% who control the resources of the planet today. 740 companies control 80% of world trade. 80% of world trade. This figure was published in a study by Vitali, published in the New Scientist a few years ago. You can reference it and check it. 740 companies control the flow of world trade around the world. Unless we organise on a national and an international scale to take control over the resources within society, then we are doomed on a pathway to constantly increasing the inequality in society and constantly worsening the living standards of the workers, even in the wealthiest countries of the world. Since 2008, there has barely been any growth in the British or American economy. And in the living standards of the people's living standards have gone down in America and Europe since 2008. Life for the 30-year-olds today is worse than the 40-year-olds 10 years ago. Life for the 30-year-olds in 10 years' time is expected to be worse than the 30-year-olds today. This is insane and irrational. Every advance in capacity of human beings to improve production, to improve culture, to improve education, should result in a corresponding improvement of the lives of the people. That is why we are on a mission, and we ask you to join in our mission to transform the Labour Party, to transform it root and branch, to turn every local Labour Party into a militant, campaigning force, fighting for the rights of young people, fighting for the rights in education, fighting to protect jobs and services, and building a plan to transform society in Britain and internationally, according to the will, the democratic will of the population. What you, ladies and gentlemen, consider to be your priorities, bring them to the Labour Party, discuss your ideas, debate your ideas, argue your ideas, and campaign for a transformation in society away from this get rich first minority, stamp on everybody else, the majority, to transform society, to serve the needs of the majority, for peace, freedom and plenty for all the population, in harmony with the ecology. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please join the Labour Party. Take one of our journalists here. Labour briefing, £1. Voice of the left in the Labour Party.